She looked at me like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. We'd been on 3 dates. Good dates, I thought. Conversations that flowed, laughs that seemed genuine, and I just suggested we go back to my place for a drink, reading what I believed were clear signals that she was interested. Her responses lived in my head. Rentree for 6 years. You're really nice, like genuinely nice, and that's the problem. I stood there on the sidewalk trying to process what I just heard. Nice was the problem. Being kind, being respectful, being attentive, treating her well. These were somehow working against me. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she tried to soften it. I just don't feel that spark. You're amazing. Some girl is going to be really lucky. Just not me. The consolation prize speech, the emotional severance package handed out to men who did everything right and still lost. I went home that night and did what any moderately self-aware person does after rejection. I replayed every interaction looking for the mistake. Was I too available? Should I have been more aloof? Did I compliment her too much? Not enough? Was I supposed to be more aggressive, less interested, more mysterious? I had no idea. And every piece of dating advice I found online contradicted the last piece. Be confident but not arrogant. Be interested but not needy. Be yourself but also improve yourself. Be direct but also mysterious. The advice was a maze with no exit. And then something shifted in my thinking. Instead of guessing what women wanted based on what men were telling other men women wanted, why not just ask women directly? Not in a theoretical way. Not, what do you find attractive in general? But specifically, concretely, what actual moment, what specific thing made you suddenly want someone you hadn't wanted before? When did the switch flip from he's fine to I need to be closer to him? I decided to run an experiment. 6 months, 500 conversations in person, not through surveys or online forms because I needed to see faces when they answered. I needed to catch the moment when the rehearsed answer gave way to the real one. I positioned it as research for a project which was technically true, and I promised complete anonymity, which made women willing to be more honest than they'd be in any other context. What I found over those 6 months completely dismantled everything I thought I knew about attraction. And more importantly, it explained exactly why being nice had become a problem. Not because niceness is bad, but because of what niceness was covering up, or more accurately, what it was preventing from ever appearing in the first place. Let me start by destroying some myths, because this is where most men are operating from completely broken frameworks. The first 50 women I talked to gave me surface-level answers. Confidence, sense of humor, ambition, good conversation, physical attraction, intelligence. These answers felt right. They matched what I'd read everywhere. And they were also completely useless because they were describing outcomes, not causes. They were naming the traits they noticed in men they were already attracted to, not explaining what created the attraction in the first place. By conversation 127, I started asking follow-up questions. Okay, but when did you feel it? What was the specific moment? And this is where the answers started changing. They'd tell me about a guy they'd known for months who they'd never thought about romantically. And then one night during a group dinner, something shifted, or a coworker they'd worked alongside for a year who suddenly became interesting after a specific interaction, or someone they'd been casually dating who transformed from, "We're just hanging out," to, "I can't stop thinking about him." Because of one conversation, the pattern that emerged had nothing to do with what these men looked like or what they did for work or how much money they made. The shift happened in moments. Specific moments where the man's energy changed in a way that triggered something involuntary in her. She didn't decide to become attracted. Her brain just suddenly categorized him differently. And when I pushed for what specifically changed, the descriptions became remarkably consistent. Here's what it wasn't. It wasn't him suddenly becoming more confident in the traditional sense. It wasn't him saying something particularly clever or impressive. It wasn't him demonstrating status or resources. It wasn't him playing hard to get or being mysterious. All of these tactics that men are taught to deploy, they showed up in exactly 0 of the moments women described as the attraction trigger. In fact, when I described these tactics and asked if they'd ever experienced sudden attraction because a man deployed them, the response was usually some version of, "God, no. That would be such a turnoff." This confused me initially because confidence shows up everywhere in dating advice as the magic ingredient. Be confident and women will want you. But the confidence these women were describing wasn't what dating coaches mean by confidence. It wasn't the guy walking into a room and commanding attention. It wasn't the guy with the smoothest lines. It wasn't even the guy who was most successful or accomplished. The confidence they described was quieter, more internal, and it manifested in ways I'd never connected to attraction before. By conversation 312, I'd started to see the structure clearly. Women kept describing a specific emotional state they experienced around certain men. They used different words for it, but the experience was consistent. They felt seen without feeling evaluated. They felt comfortable expressing emotion without fear of judgment or attempts to fix them. They experienced the man as fully present in a way that felt rare and almost shocking in its intensity. And this presence created safety. Not the safety of friendship, a different kind of safety. The safety to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, it turned out, was the direct precursor to desire. Let me explain this more carefully because it's counterintuitive. And most men get it backwards. We're taught that attraction comes from creating tension, from being unpredictable, from keeping women slightly off balance. And there is truth to the idea that too much comfort kills attraction. But the women I talked to weren't describing comfort. They were describing something that looked like comfort from the outside but felt completely different from the inside. They were describing the experience of being around a man who was so grounded in himself that he didn't need anything from them. Not validation, not approval, not even reciprocal attraction. This is where the nice guy problem becomes clear. When I was being nice on those first 3 dates, I was performing. I was managing her impression of me. I was trying to be the version of myself that would make her like me. Every compliment was strategic. Every question was calculated. Every story was chosen to paint me in the best light. And she could feel all of it. Maybe not consciously, but some part of her brain was registering that I needed her approval, that I was working to get something from her, that my niceness was transactional rather than genuine. The men who triggered attraction weren't nice in that way. They weren't mean either. They were something else entirely. They were present without a gender. They paid attention because they were genuinely curious, not because attention was a tool to create attraction. They asked questions because they wanted to understand, not because they were following some script about being a good listener. And this agenda-free presence created a completely different dynamic. She wasn't being pursued. She wasn't being impressed. She was being seen. And being truly seen is so rare that when it happens, it triggers something primal. Woman after woman described variations of the same experience. The moment when the guy stopped trying to impress her and just existed comfortably in his own skin. One woman told me about a date where the guy had clearly been nervous and performing for the first hour, asking questions, telling stories, being charming, and then something happened. Maybe he relaxed. Maybe he gave up on trying to manage the outcome. But his entire energy shifted. He leaned back. He stopped filling every silence. He made one observation about her that was so specific and accurate that she felt genuinely understood for the first time all night. And in that moment, something clicked. The attraction appeared out of nowhere because he'd finally stopped preventing it by trying too hard. By conversation 398, I'd identified what I started calling the gravitational pull. Some men, not many, create this subtle magnetism that's hard to describe, but unmistakable when you're around it. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's not dominant in the traditional sense. It's a kind of calm, groundedness that makes conversations feel different, more real, less performative. People lean in naturally because being near this energy feels good in a way they can't quite articulate. And the core of this gravitational pull is self-containment. The man who has it doesn't need external validation to feel okay about himself. His sense of worth is internal, stable, not dependent on whether she's attracted to him or whether anyone approves of his choices. He's comfortable with himself in a way that's not arrogant or defensive. He just is who he is without apology or performance. And women respond to this with desire because it's the opposite of neediness. Neediness, I learned, is the universal attraction killer. Not just in the obvious, desperate ways, but in subtle ways that most men don't recognize as neediness. trying too hard to be interesting, working to be impressive, managing what she thinks, seeking approval through jokes or stories or demonstrations of value. All of it reads as need. Need for her to like you, need for her to validate you, need for her to fill some gap in your sense of self. And need triggers the opposite of attraction. It triggers caretaking instinct at best and avoidance at worst. The men who created genuine desire weren't pursuing. They were being. And the difference between pursuing and being is everything. Pursuit implies she has something you want and you're working to get it. Being implies you're complete whether she joins you or not. Pursuit creates pressure. Being creates space. And in that space, attraction can actually grow because it's not being forced or managed or performed into existence. Let me give you the clearest example from the entire experiment. Woman number 406 told me about a guy she'd been casually seeing. They'd been on maybe 6 dates over 2 months. She liked him fine but wasn't feeling strong attraction. And then one night, he did something that changed everything. They were at his place, and she was talking about a work situation that was stressing her out. She was venting, getting emotional, and instead of trying to fix it or offering solutions or minimizing her feelings, he just sat there completely still, completely attentive, making eye contact, not filling the silence, just holding space for her emotion without trying to manage it or change it or make it about him. She said she'd never experienced anything like it. Most men either try to solve the problem immediately or they get uncomfortable with the emotion and try to change the subject or lighten the mood. This guy just let her feel what she was feeling. He wasn't afraid of her emotion. He wasn't trying to rescue her from it. He was just present with it. And that presence created such intense safety that she felt herself opening in a way she hadn't before. By the end of the conversation, she said she wanted him in a way that surprised her. Not because he'd done anything to create attraction, but because his comfort with her discomfort had triggered something involuntary in her brain. This is the piece that dating advice completely misses. Attraction isn't created through clever tactics or strategic behavior. It's created through psychological and emotional states. When a man is internally stable, when he's not seeking validation, when he's comfortable with emotion without needing to fix or avoid it, when he's genuinely present without agenda, he creates conditions where her brain can relax enough to feel desire. But when he's performing, when he's managing outcomes, when he's trying to impress or please or win her over, he prevents those conditions from ever existing. The trying itself is the problem. By conversation 500, I had absolute clarity on what had happened on that sidewalk 6 years ago. She said I was nice and that was the problem. She was right, but not in the way most people interpret that statement. The problem wasn't kindness. The problem was that my kindness was a performance designed to get her to like me. Every nice thing I did was transactional. Every compliment was strategic. Every attentive moment was calculated. And underneath all of it was desperate need for her approval. She couldn't feel attracted because I'd made my value contingent on her validation. I'd positioned her as the gatekeeper to my worth. And that positioning killed any possibility of genuine desire. The men who triggered attraction didn't make women the source of their value. Their value was intrinsic, self-determined, complete before she ever showed up. And that completeness was the most attractive thing possible because it meant being with him was a choice rather than him filling a hole in her life. And she wasn't filling a hole in his. 2 complete people choosing to share space rather than 2 incomplete people using each other to feel whole. After I finished the 500 conversations, I spent 3 months integrating what I'd learned. I stopped performing. I stopped trying to be impressive. I stopped managing what women thought of me. I started practicing presence, real presence, not the fake active listening that dating coaches teach. I learned to be comfortable with silence. I learned to be comfortable with emotion, both mine and others. I learned to stop seeking validation externally and start generating it internally. I learned that my value wasn't determined by whether women were attracted to me, but by how I showed up, regardless of outcome. The results were immediate and undeniable. Conversations became effortless. Women started initiating contact. Sexual tension appeared naturally without me trying to create it. And the quality of women I was attracting changed. I was no longer drawing women who wanted to be pursued or impressed or won over. I was attracting women who were themselves grounded and secure, who responded to the same qualities I'd developed in myself. The full circle moment came about 4 months after I'd finished the experiment. I ran into the woman who'd rejected me on that sidewalk. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, and at the end of the conversation, she asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. The exact same woman who told me I was too nice to ever spark attraction was now attracted. I'd become the same person, but different. Still kind, still respectful, still attentive, but no longer performing any of it. No longer needing her approval, no longer trying to get her to see my value. Just existing comfortably as myself and letting her decide whether she wanted to be part of that or not. I didn't end up pursuing it. Not because of bitterness or revenge, but because I genuinely moved past needing that validation. The fact that she was now interested mattered less than the fact that I was no longer desperately seeking her interest. And that shift from needing to not needing was the entire journey condensed into one interaction. Here's what I want men to understand from all of this. You cannot fake non-neediness. You cannot perform self-containment. You cannot strategically deploy presence. Women can feel the difference between genuine groundedness and attempted groundedness. The trying gives you away every time. You have to actually do the internal work of becoming someone whose worth isn't dependent on external validation. You have to actually become comfortable with yourself to the point where you're genuinely okay whether she's attracted or not. This work is harder than learning pickup lines. It's harder than developing clever openers or mastering the art of banter. It requires facing the parts of yourself that desperately need approval and healing those parts rather than just covering them with better tactics. It requires building genuine self-worth rather than rented confidence that disappears the moment you're rejected. But once you do this work, attraction stops being something you try to create and becomes something that happens naturally as a byproduct of who you are. Women respond to your energy before you say a word. Conversations flow without effort. Tension builds without you manufacturing it. And you stop experiencing rejection as evidence that you're not enough and start experiencing it as simple incompatibility. Not every woman will be attracted to you even when you're completely grounded. But the ones who are will be attracted in a way that's real rather than manufactured. And real attraction, the kind that comes from genuine connection rather than performed impressively. That's the only kind worth having. I think about those 500 conversations often, about the patterns that emerged, about how consistent the answers became once I learned to ask the right questions, about how much time I wasted trying to master tactics when the real music answer was stopping the tactics entirely. Every woman was describing the same thing using different words. They were describing the experience of being around a man who was complete, who didn't need them to feel whole, who was present without a gender, who could hold space for emotion without fear, who was comfortable enough with himself that his comfort created safety, for her to be herself. This completeness isn't something you perform. It's something you become. And you become it not by getting better at attracting women, but by becoming someone who doesn't need to attract women to feel valuable. The needlessness itself becomes the attraction. The self-sufficiency becomes the draw. The internal stability becomes the magnetism. You stop chasing and start being. And in that being, people naturally gravitate toward you because grounded energy is rare and powerful and unmistakable when you encounter it. That woman on the sidewalk 6 years ago did me the biggest favor of my life. She held up a mirror and showed me that my niceness was a cage built from need. A performance designed to get approval. And her rejection forced me to question everything, which led to the experiment, which led to understanding the actual mechanics of attraction, which led to becoming someone who didn't need the understanding anymore because I transcended the need that made the understanding necessary in the first place. If you're watching this and you've experienced similar rejections, if you've been told you're nice but something's missing, if you've watched women be attracted to men you consider less worthy than you, understand that the problem isn't you. It's that you're performing a version of yourself designed to get approval rather than being yourself regardless of approval. And that performance, however skillful, will always prevent genuine attraction from emerging because it signals need. A need is the opposite of the self-contained presence that triggers desire. Stop trying to attract women. Start building yourself into someone whose value is self-determined. Start practicing presence. Start becoming comfortable with emotion and silence and yourself. Start generating internal validation rather than seeking it externally. Do the actual work of becoming grounded rather than learning to fake groundedness. And watch what happens. Not because you've mastered some new tactic, but because you've become the kind of person who doesn't need tactics. The kind of person who creates gravitational pull simply by existing comfortably in their own skin. This is the real answer I found after 500 conversations. Not a hack or a trick or a line, a fundamental truth about human psychology. We're attracted to completeness, to self-sufficiency, to people who've done the internal work of becoming whole rather than seeking wholeness through us. And once you become that person, attraction stops being something you chase and becomes something that finds you. Not always, not with everyone, but often enough and with the right people that the entire game changes from exhausting pursuit to natural magnetism. That's what 500 women taught me. That the answer was never out there in tactics or strategies or clever approaches. It was always internal in becoming someone who doesn't need to deploy tactics because their presence alone is enough. And that journey from needing to not needing, that's where real attraction lives. Not in the performance of value, but in the embodiment of it. Not in trying to get her to see your worth, but knowing your worth so deeply that her seeing it becomes irrelevant to you seeing it yourself.